The photo for this was taken on a hike with my oldest son, riding on his daddy's shoulders. Beach Mountain, Acadia National Park, one of my favorite places to paint and go. It's right at sunset, so we were actually running down the mountain as fast as we could to get there before dark, with the kid. And it was just gorgeous, that golden hour light. So I'm starting with a gold glow, nickel azo yellow, and dropping in some violet, cobalt violet. And I'm using my squirrel mop, so it's very ragged and stuff, and very loose strokes, very juicy, letting everything flow together. The twin rocker paper is perfect for something like this, where there's the hazy effect, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to work with it and move the paint around a lot on the paper. And the twin rocker will let me do that. So just dash around, and you really do need a round brush for this, because you can get and it doesn't have to be a mop, just a round brush, because you can get the great big washes and the tiny little lines dashing through them and connecting them, and everything connects exactly how you want it to. Whenever you're painting, always remember what the view looks like. Just keep that in mind. And I'm thinking nice golden hazy light, and not really the glare so much as just a beautiful golden haze. So I don't want too much paint on my upper right side, especially. I want to keep my touch very light on the upper right, and the rest of the painting, there is really not too much contrast. There's some deep shadows, but there's not really the strong highlights, except in a couple areas where the sun just hits it. But these are a golden glow versus the bright white. So a very soft paper, one that I can work with, is right for this. I'm going to let everything bleed together. So start out with the golden glow, because I want that to show from underneath and at the edges on the body. And now I'm bleeding, and I'm just painting some cobalt violet. It dries pretty quickly. It's all still a little bit wet. This is all still the first wash. And I'm only using 3 colors on the first wash. But I always think the first wash is really where that's the big, you have to make it. You have to pay attention during this stage and have every single brush stroke right. This is also the time when my 3-year-old decides to have a temper tantrum or something happens. It's a crisis. But this is the time. It's a crisis unless it's a real emergency. Just let the paint stay on the wall that he splatter painted for a few minutes. Worry about the paint here. And yes, that usually does happen. So notice as I'm moving up to the right, I'm getting softer and softer and more of that golden haze. And the first stage, the first wash, it usually takes about 15 minutes, and make sure that that time is just for that. That's all you're focusing on. Maybe have some fast music playing, but that's it. Not even books on tape for this part, because every single stroke matters. Now here's the third color for the first wash, ultramarine blue. Very soft. I just went a little bit, hey, there's a mountain up there. And we're hiking around Beach Mountain. Not on the ladder trail part. I think that'll wait until we don't have toddlers with us. So I'm doing all the holes in here, and remember, I'm not going to have too much white in this painting, just a few areas. And you could eliminate white, but it's like eliminating white flowers or green in a garden. It just seems harsh. You lose the spark. But it really does depend on the painting. So notice I'm getting a little bit darker, a little bit bolder as I move far away, but also blurring it more, because while there's just less definition the further you get away from the sunlight. Now this is all still wet. So I know I want some strong darks, and ultramarine blue is my strong dark because it's great for granulating, and I wanted a little bit of a cool touch. I'm cutting around the whites because I don't want to use any more gouache than I have to in such a, it's just such a soft light that gouache is a little bit harsh. I want to keep with the white of the paper if I can. So only 3 pigments used in the first wash. I let this dry completely. Now notice how much lighter it is when it's dried. It dries to at least half the value level. So don't be scared to paint. Second wash, almost as critical as the first, but the first is really when you're building your basic framework. And now here's the first layer of, the building material on it. So a lot more of the nickel azo yellow. Bleed in. It's still bright enough during the day where there's a few bright greens just where the light's hitting it. And I need some strong darks. Those trees are full of strong dark shadows, and I want them all bleeding everywhere because there is so little definition at this time of day out of the sunlight. And notice all these colors are very granulating. They make interesting patterns when they bleed together. So I'm letting them. I'm not trying to fuss with them. I'm not actually mixing on the palette here. I'm letting them all flow together. And here's negative painting a little bit of one of the birch tree trunks. But mostly I am just letting everything flow together, not being too fussy about it. So this has the nickel azo, and for the first layer for the green, and then I want that to dry a little bit so it glows. So my son's wearing a yellow sweatshirt, and all you can see is that he's a little bit more golden colored than my husband's wearing a navy sweatshirt. We do go camping in Maine, so lots of hiking and campfire stuff. The very tip of my husband's head is showing over the shoulder there, and that's important because it really makes the shapes. So most lines you want to be sloppy except for those few that are very important, and that's how you get the impressionist effect. You say, okay, well, these lines are important. I'm going to worry about them. I'm going to let everything else blur and just do some dashes. So the central figures are, of course, the boy and the man, and the next most important is the path, and away from that, everything's blurred. But you don't want to just scrub it all out. You want to be a little bit more sloppy, a little bit looser in your painting. I'm using a lot of the cobalt violet because it is such a soft color. I'm pulling it right into the shadow areas so the figure connects with the background. And I want that bleeding, just like with the tree, I want the interesting effects. I do need a dark shadow leading down the path there, or it really isn't going to show up right. But I don't want such a dark shadow that it distracts. I want it blurred. I want you to see that it's a rocky hiking path, but not too much. Just so you feel like, oh, I'm going to go take that hike. And trust me, you should. It's a really nice one. Some ultramarine blue to darken it. But remember how much lighter ultramarine blue dries. Get the yellow sweatshirt to blur down into the navy. And now I'll go back over that a few times to make it a little bit more blue and less green, because I do want that to contrast with the background. Now, I'm going to limit my use of burnt sienna. It's the great granulating, but it's a harsh color. So I just want it in a few areas that just aren't going to get dark enough without it. Blot a bit. It's funny how techniques change over time, and maybe it's also what I'm painting, but I used to blot a whole lot more as a layering technique, and I'm changing a bit. But I guess techniques change over time. So I'm laying all these run together. Using granulating colors like that, they almost paint themselves. It's so much fun. That's the wonderful thing about watercolor that you can't get in any other medium. They flow together. All right, so I'm doing some deep shadows back there, and you can see the layers of the bushes and stuff in the background. And I'm just weighing some purple hazy things back there somewhere. It gives a little depth to the painting. It pulls you down that path. This really has a very limited palette. I had to have splatter. Can't have a painting without splatter, right? Very limited amount of splatter, though, and I don't want to be too fussy about it. Keep it right there where you need it. I really like the blue greens in there. I used a touch of, in the background, I used a touch of cobalt to make that hazy color. A little bit of detail back there. And the round is where you want for detail. The scroll mop can only do so much. Now, don't paint every needle on the pine tree, because that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for the wonderful loose pine branches, but they are not the star of the show. A little bit of detail here with the rigger, but don't get caught up in all the tiny little things you could do to make it look very realistic. This is an impressionist watercolor. This is not a photograph. Photographs are easy. Impressions, actually much more difficult. So I'm connecting some of the dots with the splatter paint and just making it very, very loose, and where you just see the colors, the shapes I want to show. A little bit more on the path. Still, I want that, it's important, but you don't want to go too far. So, go hiking down this path sometime. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching with me. And this is a very special painting to me. I'm going to keep this one. And I hope that inspires you to go hiking and paint a painting. So if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to my videos or give me a thumbs up. Happy painting!